Deputies say they got a 911 call from Century Drive, not far from Disney's Pop Century Resort this morning, where they found a man in his 30s unconscious.
The internet is good at two things: giving us unlimited access to information and ruining our childhood memories. Disney as a company has been rife with controversy since its inception in 1923. But the internet has taken what they've been given and run with it. From ghost sightings and urban legends to horror stories and conspiracies, the internet continues its corruption of the House of Mouse. Today we delve into the dark side of Disney, the myths, the rumors, and the internet's relentless quest to corrupt everything we feel nostalgic for. You've probably heard this line somewhere before. No one is allowed to die at Disney. Instead, they are taken off the premises, where they can die peacefully, away from the other guests. This common sentiment spread across social media in many forms. There's also a TikTok video from someone who worked at Disney who talks about witnessing it firsthand. This meme talks about it, but is certainly not the main source. This claim actually originates from those who've worked at Disney parks, who claim that when someone dies at Disney, they are taken away and attempted to be resuscitated until they leave the premises. Once they left the land of the House of Mouse, they're allowed to die. From there, the sentiment became an urban legend, spreading from worker to worker and guest to guest. It was even mentioned in a book called Inside the Mouse. This book, which is supposedly a reliable source, covers the culture that has been growing around Disney and its parks. It takes a look at all things Disney, including the strange and sometimes dark customs at Disney. So is it true that no one dies at Disney? No, not at all. The amount of deaths at Disney parks might surprise you. Actually, no, they will surprise you. Since the Disney park's inception, there have been many reported fatalities between all sites combined. This number does not include those who were injured, just those who lost their lives while inside the many parks. 93 people since 1955 have passed away at the happiest place on Earth, with the first death at Disney taking place in 1964 at Disneyland, only 9 years after the park first opened. Those numbers might seem like a lot, but they're pretty low all things considered. If we look closer at the statistics and see what people are actually dying from, we have a clearer picture of what is happening here. 22 of the total 93 died from natural causes. These cases involve people with medical conditions or who suffered from heat exhaustion. The next highest number is 13, and it's for suicides. Next is 10 for drowning. Falling is a total of 9. Crushing, head injury, and blunt force trauma all sit at 5 each. Plane accidents account for 4 of the 93. People run over and those counted as unknown cause of death sit at 3 each. 4 people have died from vehicle accidents, and the rest have had 1 incident for each cause of death. This includes alligator attacks, an amoebic infection of the brain, boat accidents, brain hemorrhages, decapitation, explosion, pulmonary embolism, shooting, stabbing, and septic shock. There are so many ways that these individuals have met their end while attending the parks. The most interesting is that most died from natural causes. This is because natural causes could mean many different things that aren't specific enough to give their own category. Suicide being the second highest is something that sadly doesn't surprise me, not with how people have attached themselves to Disney. As far as those who have lost their lives at Disney, they are separated into 2 main categories. 79% of all deaths at Disney are the guests that attend the parks. The remaining 21% represents the employees. This is about what you'd expect. Employees are easier to manage than guests, who can be unruly when not supervised. Employees receive training and have protections in place, while guests have protections but no training. Further diving into the Disney casualties, they're separated into 5 age demographics. Children under 10, teens and tweens 11 to 18, adults 19 to 64, seniors 65 and up, and unknown. Of those 5 demographics, the highest mortality is for adults. This makes sense since they are the largest age demographic represented. They account for 43.3% of the victims at the park. while the smallest is the seniors at 11.1%. If you were to mix the teen and children under 10 demographic, you'd end up with 31%, but as they are displayed now, it is 15.5 for each. Graphs and stats don't usually tell the full story though. Let's take a look at a few of those incidents that have marred Disney's no-death policy. In May of 1964, the first ever person to die at Disney was 15-year-old Mark Maples, who was killed while riding on the Matterhorn bobsleds. During the rise to the peak of the mountain, Maples, or one of his companions, unbuckled his seatbelt. Maple then lost his balance while trying to stand up on the ride. Mark would fall from the top of the ride and collide with the ground below. He didn't die on impact and instead suffered a fractured skull and ribs. He was rushed to the hospital. There he would lose in a 3-day battle for his life. This would mark the first time someone had died ever while at Disney. Though technically he died at the hospital 3 days later. This wouldn't just be the first time a guest died due to an accident at a Disney park. It would also become a sign of how many people would lose their lives at the parks. It perfectly reflects that stat breakdown for those who die at Disney. It's almost always a guest that is breaking a rule or ignoring some sort of safety guideline. The next incident would take place 2 years later. A 19-year-old named Thomas Guy Cleveland would lose his life while attempting to sneak into Disneyland. He had hopped 2 security fences, one 6 feet and the second 16 feet. He would then appear on the monorail and get a single shout from security to get down, before he was struck by the train and dragged underneath for 30 to 40 feet. This accident was easily avoidable, but something hard to account for. In 1984, there was an incident involving the same ride that took the life of the first victim. Dolly Regine Young, a 48-year-old woman, would lose her life on the Matterhorn. She would ascend the mountain and then begin her descent. While descending, she was thrown from her bobsled and landed on the track of another. She was struck and pinned beneath the second bobsled. In one of the most gruesome deaths at a Disney park, she was decapitated by the bobsled. Authorities still are not sure if she undid her buckle herself or if it wasn't fully engaged in the first place. She was the only person in the bobsled, so it's hard to tell exactly what happened. This, thankfully, would be the last death reported on the Matterhorn ride, but it was far from the last death at Disney. We have seen incidents where guests have ignored safety precautions and lost their lives, but what about employees? The most infamous of these accidents at Disney takes place at one that you wouldn't expect: America Sings. This incident has been reported many times on YouTube, but that's because it's an important moment. There was also a lot of speculation around it, which fueled public interest. In 1974, 18-year-old Deborah Gale Stone was crushed to death at the America Sings attraction. She stepped too close to the rotating wall and a non-movable one, where she was crushed between them. This was witnessed by a family during the ride's operation. They say they heard a scream and they thought they saw a child being pulled away near the wall. Deborah's death would mark the first time since the park's opening that an employee would be killed at the park. Before this incident, 4 other guests had died at the park. Never before had an employee suffered the same fate. This stands as one of the worst incidents at the park. Being crushed is reportedly one of the worst ways you can die. Being just barely 18 and freshly graduated from high school, she had a whole life to live. She was likely excited to work at a place that was supposed to be filled with the happy screaming of children. Now, she is permanently part of the park, and her scream is one that the grounds will never forget. There was also speculation and a rumor that there exists lost media of the incident. Supposedly, it had been caught on tape, but was now hidden away in the Disney vaults. This rumor has been spreading all over social media, mostly on TikTok, but there's just no proof of its existence. If it did exist, it would likely never see the light of day. There's just no way a major company like Disney would ever let it leak. There is a video of Deborah working at America Sings before the accident. There's also a version that has spread across social media that has some choice inclusions near the end. There's a scream added at the end, which is supposedly her final scream before the ride crushed her. This just isn't true. The video added the scream, as there's a version with full sound that existed before. This is just another social media conspiracy that has spread from YouTube to TikTok and back. There have been several occurrences of violent altercations at Disney. Only 2 resulted in death, with one man being stabbed and another being shot. The first took place in 1981 when an 18-year-old was stabbed during an altercation with a 28-year-old. The second took place in 1987 and was gang-related. And it also took place in the parking lot. Regardless of how you look at it, the rumor of no one ever dying at Disney couldn't be further from the truth. It doesn't necessarily matter if they have to be pronounced dead at the hospital first. The incidents all took place at the happiest place on Earth. Though, I'm sure the rumors will continue long into the future. There's a supposed, odd, but disturbing sight that one can find at any of the Disney parks. Sometimes, out of the corner of your eye, you might see a person. Now, it can be an adult or a child, though mostly they are seen as children. They'll be wearing these weird-looking masks. On closer inspection, you'll see that they have gas masks on. Only, they have a very familiar shape, one that represents everything that Disney has created since the inception of the company. It's a Mickey Mouse themed gas mask. If you try and focus on them, you'll notice that they're gone. Well, it must have been a figment of your imagination. Or maybe not. Some people have reported getting closer to these people and looking through the lens of the mask. What they saw frightened them. What they saw, exactly, was nothing. These entities are known as Gascots, and they originate online. In my first video discussing the ways the internet has corrupted Disney, I discussed 3 very influential creepypastas. They were the Abandoned by Disney trilogy by Slime Beasts. The stories would have crazy effects on the internet, including creating a whole new subgenre of horror. Of the 3, my favorite was Room Zero. This is the second of the 3 stories and was by far the most interesting. It also created a few urban legends all its own. One of those we'll get to later. But the most important one is the Gascots. Gascots were created when a group of people went into a mass hysteria inside a bomb shelter. The bomb shelter was named Room Zero and was created in the 60s during the Cold War to withstand bombs if ever needed. One day the sirens of an air raid went off, and a whole horde of people rushed into Room Zero. While inside, officials urged everyone to put on their gas masks. They did so. Then the lights went out, and chaos ensued. A group of employees and a few patrons made it out of the mess. When they saw that there was no air raid, they returned to Room Zero and stared down into the darkness at the bottom of the stairs. The sounds from before had gone completely silent. When inspected, they only heard a single voice come from inside the darkness of the room. Since then, the rooms had been sealed up and no one is to discuss its existence anymore. This was the ending of the Room Zero story. This mass hysteria created the Gascots. But they would be further pushed in the Five Nights at Treasure Island game and new stories that wanted to use the entities. They would soon take on a life of their own online, becoming a literal corruption of childhood innocence. So they are just a product of a creepy story that spread online. Well, yes, but there is something else that inspired the story which is just as creepy as the Gascots themselves. That is the real-life existence of the Mickey Mouse gas masks. In 1942, Disney, along with the Sun Rubber Company, created a gas mask that was intended to ease the minds of children. If they ever needed to wear a gas mask, then these were the ones that they should. With only 1,000 in existence, they were never made available to the public. These gas masks were Mickey Mouse themed. They had large round eyes, ears on top, and a snout in the front. They're supposed to look just like the mouse that many children felt comfortable with. Though, in retrospect, they look like anything but. The masks look more like a morbid rendition of the mouse. They have a wartime dystopian look to them. The ones that have survived all show their age, but I can't imagine them looking that appealing to children even when they were brand new. The rust and yellowing of the protective glass don't help in the slightest. These masks clearly inspired Room Zero's creation of the Gascot, though I can't be sure exactly how much. The story made these masks more prominently known, but the first article I could find about them came in 2015. so the story likely had a hand in the reporting of these strange objects. You might have seen this image and caption going around the internet for a while. It reads, "When Disney employees die while in their suit at Disney World, another employee must sit them on a bench so it looks like they're just sitting down until closing time." So all those pictures of happy children sitting next to Disney characters, there's a chance the person in the suit is dead. This is one of the more widespread stories on social media. They come from pages called The Dark Side of Disney or Creepy Mania. According to Snopes, the source comes from a Tumblr post with the same caption. The post was from 2014, but the origin can be found even further back. Room Zero, which we just talked about, had this same story. I contacted the creator, Slime Beast, and got a screenshot showing that it came out before that post on Tumblr. Snopes can update their findings with the original Room Zero as the origin, but I doubt they'll even bother to. Slime Beast also claimed that the idea for the dead mascot came from the rumor that no one dies at Disney. He, of course, knew that the rumor wasn't true, but played with the idea in the story. So that's the actual origin of the urban legend. But is there even a fraction of truth to it? The only time in Disney's history that a mascot died on the premises while in costume was in 2004. A man named Javier Cruz was killed while wearing his Pluto costume backstage at a parade. He was set to be at the tail end of the parade before being accidentally run over by a float. The accident wasn't seen by guests at the park. Rumors say that another mascot will come and sit with the deceased until the park closes so they can be evacuated without alerting the public. This happening behind the scenes wouldn't count towards disproving the claims, exactly. However, there have been instances of characters falling and receiving immediate assistance. Disney goes through many hoops to make it all seem like a real, seamless, magical world, but that doesn't mean that they would let someone die to stay in character. That would be a violation of human rights. Not to mention a real dark blemish on the magical world they want to portray. So no, mascots don't contain the bodies of the dead. It originates from a creepypasta and somehow became popular enough to be spread as an urban legend. This isn't the first time that this has happened, and it won't be the last. In the last video I made about Disney, I covered a trilogy of creepypastas called Abandoned by Disney, Room Zero, and Corrupt Us. These stories were very important in shaping the way the internet saw the Disney brand. More importantly, they created a subgenre of creepypasta that focused on Disney. The first story takes place at an abandoned Disney resort called Mowgli's Palace. This abandoned structure was where the narrator would do his investigation. It's a story that creates a vivid picture of this place and is so vivid that people thought that it might be real. Although Mowgli's Palace isn't real, it does have some relation to reality. Disney has abandoned a few places, just like in the story. The most well-known and the one that likely inspired Abandoned by Disney was Walt Disney World's Discovery Island. Discovery Island, originally named Treasure Island, was purchased by Disney in 1965. It is located on the Disney World Resort grounds. Originally opening in 1965, it would be used as an attraction where guests can observe wildlife. The attraction would later get recognized as a zoological park. With this classification change, it would also change its name from Treasure Island to Discovery Island. The attraction hosted an array of exotic animals including toucans, lemurs, Galapagos turtles, and cranes. Other attractions on the island included several monkeys, swans, and an alligator pool. In 1999, Disney would abandon the island. The animals were all transferred to Disney's Animal Kingdom or other zoos. The island would be closed to tourists and left to rot like so many other Disney ventures. Rumors were swirling around that they released some of the animals into the wild, but those were unfounded as of now. With so much architecture built on the island, it was only a matter of time before it would all rot away. Disney clearly felt no need to clean up the island, instead choosing to leave it as it was, covered in decaying man-made structures and objects. This is the place that most likely inspired Abandoned by Disney. There's a YouTube video by Matt Sanswa where he explores the island. In the video, he goes through decaying buildings, through harsh overgrowth, and inside what is left of the animal enclosures. This urban exploration is what is left of the legacy of Discovery Island. For an urban explorer, it's like a gold mine of things to see. A substantial amount of stuff was just left behind. Disney thought it wasn't worth keeping, after all. So far, Disney hasn't given any reason for the abandonment of Discovery Island, which, expectedly, has led to lots of speculation. There's a rumor that an entity haunts the island. This was seen mostly online, and especially so after the release of the Abandoned by Disney series. To add more to this theory, people reported seeing lights on at the island from its closure in 1999 to 2008. These lights added speculation about what could be happening on the island. Another theory is that there was animal cruelty charges brought up against Disney by PETA. This one has some legs to stand on, but doesn't actually account for it overall, since Animal Kingdom is still open and most of the animals were moved there. If the reports were so severe as to close an island, they likely wouldn't be allowed to move them to a new facility and continue taking care of them. More so than all of this, there have been rumors that Disney was hiding something unsavory on the island. With all the wild urban legends and theories about Disney in general, the closure of an entire island was apt to bring this line of thinking into existence. People love to speculate about things, especially when they have a connection to those things. Discovery Island is no different. Regardless of the rumors, some truths make the island more than just an abandoned project. It's an attraction that Disney once operated but then left to die. The entire island is overgrown and looks like a place you'd see in a post-apocalyptic movie or game. It's like exploring a real version of a level from The Last of Us. Roof tiles are missing, doorways are falling off of hinges, and there are holes everywhere. If any place could be haunted at Disney World, it would be this one. There's a sinister air to it all. Speculation has run rampant, and that for sure has had an impact on the abandoned site. It feels like traveling through a ghost town placed on an island. Maybe you'll see a ghost or something that Disney doesn't want you to see. Something that the mouse is hiding from us all. Seeing a rundown building has sort of a horror aesthetic to it, especially one that is run by a business whose tagline is, "Making dreams come true." Discovery Island isn't the only abandoned Disney attraction. There's one that is very close to it in proximity and closed only a few years later. It's Disney's River Country. Disney's River Country was opened in 1976 and would serve as a water park. It was themed after a natural watering hole and allowed nearly 5,000 guests to swim daily. The park would be popular up until its closure in 2001. The water park also closed without any word from Disney. They closed for the year like they always do, but when it came time to reopen, they didn't. Instead, the park remained closed until 2019 when it was demolished for a new Disney Vacation Club tower. The reason behind the closure was up in the air. There were a few deaths that occurred at the park. In 1980, an 11-year-old boy died from an amoebic infection suffered while at the park. The infection targets the brain and central nervous system. He was infected while swimming in the park's pool. He was one of 4 children to die that year from the same infection, though he was the only one at River Country. This incident took place 21 years before the park would close. An additional 2 children would lose their lives at the park. Both drowned after coming off the slide. These deaths happened in 1982 and 1989. There were reports by the lifeguards on duty that they had to pull kids out of the pool in the area where the drownings happened a lot of the time. No signs showed how deep the pool was near the slide's exit. Before its demolition, the park became a popular spot for urban exploration. People would sneak over the fence or through the rear entrance to explore the park. Like Discovery Island, nature had started to retake the popular attraction. All of the pools had been drained, but residual water was still in them due to rain. All the attractions are covered in greenery and rotting away. It looked more like a jungle-themed attraction than the remnants of a water park. Reportedly, the closing music for the park, which would play at the park's closing every day, was still heard echoing through the park. Lights in buildings and on rides were also all just left as they were. It gave the place an almost hauntingly left-behind vibe. This was the main attraction for urban explorers, who wanted a haunting experience. The Disney parks have existed for nearly 70 years. In that time, they've amassed many rumors, urban legends, and mysteries. They practically have their own culture developed at each individual park. With that much history, there's bound to be some ghost stories. Ghost sightings at Disney are not a new thing. There have been rumors about supposed sightings since the creation of the park. There are so many sightings that whole YouTube channels are dedicated to just ghosts and other paranormal encounters at the parks. The earliest ghost rumor is one about Walt himself. Walt built an apartment for himself at the original Disneyland in Anaheim. This apartment is fully furnished and exists as a place for him to stay while working in the area or just relaxing with family and friends. While Walt was working or just staying in his apartment, located on Main Street, USA, you could see a lamp on in the window. This lamp always signified that he was there in the apartment. It became a sign which let guests know he was at the park. When he passed, the apartment was left how it was. One day, the lamp came on by itself and could be seen in the window of the apartment. This led to speculation that the ghost of Walt was still at the park. It was his greatest creation after all. Now the lamp is left on for him on purpose, in case he still needs to do some work. This is one of the oldest ghost stories in the park. It's not surprising though. This is not the only story revolving around Walt. There are a few more. There's one about a place where he used to smoke. According to my sources, Walt used to smoke in the back area of the park, where none of the kids could see him. This was because his mom told him that they shouldn't see him smoking. After he passed, people claimed to be able to smell the smoke in the area, even though no one smokes there anymore. It would only happen on certain days, and more likely on rainy ones. Supposedly, this is because rain can bring out smells that have soaked into objects, so the wood getting wet could produce the smell of smoke. Moving away from Disney, many stories have been passed around from employees and guests at the park. One of the most prevalent is a story of a ghost called Mr. One Way. He can be found in the Space Mountain ride. The story goes like this. If you were to ride the Space Mountain ride as a solo passenger, then you might have an unexpected guest join you. He looks like a clean-cut man with red hair. Some passengers even say he looked like a man out of time, like he came straight from the 60s. Mr. One Way will enter the ride with a lone passenger. He might talk to you or he might just listen. Some have even said that he rides in complete silence. Once you pass the part of the ride that takes your picture, he'll disappear. He never quite finishes the ride. Rather, he is just glad to have accompanied you on your trip. Most of the ghost stories revolving around Disney are just rumors, and not actually attached to people who have lost their lives at Disney. One of the most popular takes place at the Pirates of the Caribbean ride. Every morning when staffers open the ride for the day, they say, "Hello, George." Then they complete the daily setup for the attraction. If they don't say hello and goodbye to George, then there's a high chance that the ride will shut down during that day. This is a commonly cited myth spread around the cast members of the park. They say that George was a welder or construction worker of some kind who worked on the ride. In some stories he fell to his death, while others say that he was crushed by a fallen part of the attraction. He's haunted the ride ever since. George, who bears no last name, is a ghost who is often blamed for the operating issues with the ride. He's also responsible for strange phone calls and issues with stuff being moved around behind the scenes. They say that part of the set is specifically haunted by George. There's a tower that is often referred to as George's Tower. The tower has his initials written on the bottom of it, and if anyone tries to cover them up, they'll reappear later. There's also a small door behind the dog in the prison scene portion of the ride. If that door is left open, then George might mess with the ride that day. If this is done, but the door is still open the next day, the ride will surely face problems that day. This is one of the most well-known ghost stories at Disney, but it is important to note that George never existed. There's no record anywhere of a man named George who died during the construction of the ride. It was most likely just a ghost story spread from one crew to another until it became a piece of Disney Parks lore. That isn't to say that there aren't stories based on those who have passed away at Disney. On the contrary, there are several ghost sightings related to those individuals. The girl who was decapitated on the Matterhorn and the guy who lost his life when he was hit by the train both have been seen near their respective death sites. Many people have seen a man getting on the train but never leaving it. The same can be said at the Matterhorn, where a ghost can be seen walking around the ride on occasion. Speaking of trains, there is a ghost train urban legend that has also spread around Disney. The train only appears late at night. Those who have worked at the train station claim to hear a whistle late into the night. Reportedly has been called Walt's train, as he was in love with trains, specifically the ones that circled Disneyland. These ghost stories have been reported on for years, but they are far from the only ones at the park. There's a whole website dedicated to those who have seen strange sightings of the paranormal while traveling around Southern California. The website is called HauntedOrangeCounty.com. It's a website that is dedicated to more than just Disney, but also collects a fair share of Disney-related stories. The most recent story was posted by David V. He claims to have seen a ghost in the locker room at Disney. He and his sister were putting stuff in the locker when they noticed a girl crouching down, putting something in a lower level locker. After a while, David noticed the girl was still crouching down. He thought it was odd that she had been there for so long. She also appeared to be rather young, but she was completely alone with no adults accompanying her. Another short time passed when David stopped looking at her. This is when he saw her get up and start to look over at him and his sister. He could see her out of the corner of his eye. She had long, dirty blonde hair and an ankle-length skirt. She was older than he first thought, but not by much. The staring went on for longer than David would like. He slammed his bag into the locker and turned to the girl. Only, she was gone. There was no one there. He turned to ask his sister if she'd seen anyone standing there. She said that she had, but there was no one there now. This is only one of the many ghost stories that are shared on the website. A few are from the early days of Disney, while others are as recent as 2019. This is a great website if you want to hear the stories that you won't hear at the park. Disney may be the happiest place on earth, but the internet has taken that as a personal challenge to corrupt it as much as they can. And, as the internet has proven, it can corrupt anything.